Hello, fellow chess players. It's Craig Marr again, bringing you another edition of the stories behind the games. And the title of this one is called The Talking Grandmaster. Who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about none other than Pete Biyiasas, who, well, don't all grandmasters talk? Yeah, but how many of them talk during a serious tournament game to their opponents? Yeah, that was the one kind of interesting thing about Peter. I remember when he was playing expert William Briggs in a tournament game one time. This was in the 1980s. And after Briggs blundered, he said to him, "You know what? You could have won." And all the San Jose Masters were laughing about this, you know. So those were the good old days, my friends. Anyway, I first played Peter in 1977. I was just an expert while Biyiasas was over 2,400, both in the U.S. ratings and in the FIDE ratings. He was one of the top players in the United States. Back then, I was just a kid. I was kind of young, arrogant, and a bit cocky, and he was annoyed that I played kind of fast against him. But anyway, let's get to the game. This was played in 1984, January. The time control here was 40-2. And this is round 2 of a 7-rounder. This is a round robin. The Northern California Championships, with the average rating for my opponents of about 24-20. So it was a very strong all-master tournament. Peter Biyiasas was then a grandmaster. He had white. He was rated 25-16. I had the black pieces. I was rated 23-86. And anyway, so Peter had white. He opened up with d4. And now this is a bit of an unusual move by Peter. He's usually an e4 player. But for psychological reasons, he kind of wanted to get me out of my usual openings. And so this was kind of a surprise, because he never plays 1d4. So I don't know, what the heck, What the heck is going on here? I wonder what's coming next. Knight f3 is a good move. It kind of avoids the Budapest with e5. Now, in order to get me out of book, Peter played kind of an unusual move, which is now favored by Magnus Carlsen, bishop f4. You could go bishop f4 or bishop g5, and the idea here is to bring the bishop outside the pawn chain before playing e3. If you don't play e3, you're kind of forced to fianchetto your dark squared bishop. So this is a move which I don't think is that bad, but theory does not think it leads to much advantage. Anyway, c5 is probably the recommended move, but I played d5, which is probably not that good. Now he's playing h3 because he's afraid of me playing knight h5, winning the 2 bishops. So now the bishop has a retreat square. Now this is a funky move which I kind of like. It doesn't really do much, but he's hoping to get me to play knight d7, and then his bishop comes in, or bishop d7, bishop d3. See, my bishop really wants to be on b7, but he wants to force the position, the bishop, so that it's misplaced. So I play c6. Now if he takes the knight now, I'm just going to take the bishop, play b4, and this double pawn on b4 is going to be very strong, and I think black is doing fine. So I play this bishop d3. If the bishop goes back, I play b5, and then this bishop is deadwood. So this is the best diagonal for this bishop. This is too much of a passive square. d3 is the proper one. Now I'm kind of, stuck with a bad bishop, which I could get rid of with bishop a6 right now, but this bishop, even though it's bad, plays a prominent role later in the game. So you might be wondering, what am I doing playing this bishop, behind the pawns like that? Well, the fact is I'm going to play c5 at a later point, and then I really control all the important breaks in the position, which is going to be c4 and e4. And so, even though the bishop looks terrible, it really has, an important role to control, the light squares here. So, even though it kind of looks like a really bad bishop, it's not, Now I think c4 is better, c4 is much better. And then I would probably be playing c5, and then we have a game which I think is a little better for white. But c3, does threaten e4. So this is why I play c5 to... now if you play e4, now you can't even play e4 here, so you need to play queen e2 or queen b1 or something in order to bolster that square. And these are just normal developing moves. I want you to realize that in some positions you can also bring the knight to d7. C6 is a kind of an active square for the knight, where it's putting pressure on d4 for one thing. Queen c2, this is what Peter played. I'm not sure if it's such a good move because it kind of runs into pressure on this file from the rook. So now, I might be threatening pawn takes, knight takes d4 on the queen. So he's really got to do something about this situation here. So now I'm happy because he's giving up his best piece, the knight, and then this is kind of not good for white because he doesn't really have any advantage here. So I feel like, the opening has pretty much been a failure for white so far. And this was always Peter's greatest weaknesses, is that when he was playing the white pieces, he would usually get no advantage. And so you actually had a better chance of beating him with black than you did with white. Now this is kind of a lemon, he's trying to get knight g5 in, but f6 is good. Now at this point, I gave Peter kind of a quick look like this, as if I was surprised, and he said to me, "What else am I going to do?" But he didn't say it that it disrupted the other players. He said it kind of softly, But anyway, at this point, the tournament director announced that there would be a brilliancy prize. And so I said, oh, cool. So anyway, I played e5, which is, a very sharp move to get at his king, because his king is not castled. So he goes, well, what the heck is going on here? But I really have a surprise in store for Peter. It's knight takes f2. Now the idea behind this move, this is powerful. And when I played this move, he kind of let out a little yelp. I mean, he didn't do it real loud, but I could hear something coming out of his mouth. A little surprise move there. Surprise! So anyway, the idea is if he takes the knight, then I capture here, and then I'm going to not only win the 2 bishops, but open up the entire game for my bishops, and he would be busted. So he really was surprised by this move, I think. And he played castles here, and you know, we have to question whether this is even a legal move here, because in my 40 years of tournament experience, this has been extremely rare where you have knight on f2 and then the other guy castles under the knight. So it's a very, very unique position here. So I took here, he captured back, and this is what Peter missed, the fact that this pawn is hanging, and now he's just a pawn down and black has a pretty good attack going. So now Peter did a very kind of brave, or I'm not sure brave or foolish, but he decided to win a piece here. And the fact is that these pieces over here cannot participate in the kingside critical area of the board. Sometimes you have a hot spot of the board, and this has become the hot spot. But when your pieces are not protecting the king, your king will be very exposed. So anyway, I thought for a long time here, this is a critical position. I thought about simply sacking all my pieces in order to, get at the king here, but I'm still, even 25 years later, I'm still not sure what to do here. I'm really not, I played here, Queen e7, but when I went to consult with the computer here, the computer came up with a very unusual move, bishop f6, and I must admit that in the 25 years I've been looking at this position, I never even considered that move a single time. So that's how strong these computers are, and Okay, so Peter decided, okay, he's going to take the knight and get rid of some of the pressure. So now I captured the rook, and then he captured my rook. And then I captured the bishop. And now, since this is hanging, I mean, he pretty much has to go through with capturing this bishop. And now, I'm a piece down, but I have a good attack here.
Call from Kurto, very late.
So I checked him.
Call from
And now,
Kurto, very late.
it's pretty clear that,
Call from
if he goes back here,
late. Call from
the queen check
Kurto,
is probably
very
going to win.
late.
Queen g3 is probably going to win. If he comes back here, I check him here, and then I'm going to check down here, and this is also good. So he only really has, now if knight f3, for example, I can check him, king moves somewhere, and then I simply capture the knight. So he realized, and so did I, that this is his only move, really. I mean, this is his only move. And now this bishop, which has been sitting dormant here for a long time, suddenly moves into action. Now, this is a critical position, and you have to decide whether you're going to return the piece with e4 or you're going to try to hang on to the piece. This is what he did. But in fact, it's a counterintuitive position. e4, giving back the piece, is the only way to survive here. Now, I decided to push the queen back because I didn't want the rook getting into play, and then simply capture this pawn, which creates kind of a very, very rare middle game zugzwang. Zugzwang is a situation where you cannot move anything, and so he can't move the king, can't move the bishop, can't move the knight, can't move the queen. all he can do is just move his rook around. That's all he can really do here. And then I'm threatening to bring more reserves, especially the rook. So he's really in super trouble here. B3, he's desperately trying to develop, his rook, but he can't bring the rook into play. So I'm going to, meanwhile, start going for a serious attack here. So that's not really going to stop me. I'm still going to get the rook over here. Now in this position, I had about 20 minutes left, and Peter had more than a half hour here. But I really took my time, I really, had some time to think about this very strong move, bishop d7 check. And then when I made this move, Peter mutters under his breath, "He's a genius." What? Who's a genius? I was going, wow. But anyway, now black has a decisive attack because notice that this rook cannot come back into defense. And so if he comes here, queen h4, mate. So there's only really one move for Peter to make. He has to go back here, and I thought he would just resign here. And now the crowd started to gather. The vultures descended around our board. There must have been at least 10 spectators now, and they all started laughing when instead of mating Peter, I played queen g3 check. And then Peter went back here, and I finally figured, well, I better mate him, Gotta mate sooner or later. So when I went here, it's mate. Peter gets up. He's shaking. I see his cheeks, his jowls moving. He's really pissed, and he was kind of like that for a few minutes, shaking like this, like that. So I really knew that I had, really gotten to him. But anyway, so long, and thanks for watching.